After the Romans withdrew from Britain in the early 5th century, the region entered a period of significant transition and transformation, giving rise to the era of Anglo-Saxon Britain. In the vacuum left by the Roman departure, various Germanic tribes, including the Angles, Saxons, and the Jutes, began to migrate and settle across the country, gradually establishing a patchwork of small kingdoms. This period was marked by the fusion of Romano-Briton and Germanic cultures, seen in evolving languages, social structures, and artistic expression. The Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, each with their own rulers and customs, laid the foundations for the English nation, while also facing threats from Viking invasions in later centuries. Hello, welcome to the channel. If you're new here, it's good to meet you, and if you're coming back, it's good to have you with me again. If you'd like to support the channel, links to the Patreon are in the description. Otherwise, liking and subscribing and leaving your comments down below certainly helps YouTube push my videos out to a wider audience, and it's such an easy thing to do. Thank you in advance. Now, without further ado, let's get on to Anglo-Saxon England. Make yourself comfortable first, and we can begin. As Roman control over Britain waned due to the pressing Germanic invasions of Gaul, marked notably by the crossing of the Rhine in December of 406, Constantine III pulled back the Roman troops. This left Romano-British populations vulnerable to increasing raids, especially from the Picts along the eastern shores. In response, the leaders of Romano-Britain sought the aid of Anglo-Saxon mercenaries, offering them land in return for defense, a common practice of employing foederati for military assistance. It's not a bad deal. However, by around 442, these Anglo-Saxon forces rebelled. Apparently, none of them had been paid, well, signaling the breakdown of their arrangement with the Romano-British. The deteriorating security situation compelled the Romano-British to seek help from the broader Roman Empire, which led to the issuance of the Groans of the Britons, as it was called. This appeal to Aetius, the Roman Magister Militum in the West. This appeal was made despite the earlier directive from Emperor Honorius around 410, which was enough of a difficult year for the Romans, advising the British to simply fend for themselves, as the empire could no longer protect them, especially since 410 was the sack of Rome by the Visigoths. It was not a good year at all for them. Well, the subsequent period was marked by several years of pretty intense conflict between the native British populations and the Anglo-Saxon settlers. Before the fall of the Roman Empire, wherever you want to place that, generally would be placing it in the 5th century, there were already instances of Germanic people infiltrating Britain. It wasn't a completely new concept. The initial Roman invasion, led by Aulus Plotinus in AD 43, reportedly included Batavian cohorts, a Germanic group, indicating an early Germanic presence. The notion that some pre-Roman local tribes in Britain might have spoken a Germanic language is more of a recent hypothesis, though it is broadly contested due to the scarce linguistic evidence from Roman Britain, but we can't write it off completely. Now, Rome's military strategy often involved incorporating Germanic foederati, this means allied mercenaries, into its legions, and that included those that were stationed in Britain. They couldn't all be Italians. The numbers had to be padded out somewhat, and they were. Archaeological evidence, such as grave sites, confirms the presence of these mercenaries and their families within Roman Britain. The practice of enlisting Germanic help continued beyond the Roman era, notably during the Anglo-Saxon migration and the subsequent rebellion in 442, when Anglo-Saxons were recruited for Britain's defense. The establishment of Anglo-Saxon kingdoms in England, as chronicled in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, began with the arrival of small groups of invaders, leading to battles with those sub-Roman British populations. The incursions laid the foundations for the rise of the distinct kingdoms that would eventually form what we know as England. The language, Old English, gradually became dominant, and it overshadowed the British Celtic and Latin languages of the indigenous populations, Latin, of course, being heavily influenced from the Romans. Now, the Anglo-Saxon migration into Britain is part of a more broader migration period, which saw Germanic peoples move across Europe between 300 and 700 AD. This era also witnessed Britons relocating to what is now Brittany and Normandy in France, and to Britannia in northwest Spain, due to pressures such as the Anglo-Saxon Rebellion around 450 to 500 AD. Modern historians, drawing from sources like Bede, initially presented the Anglo-Saxon arrival as a kind of violent takeover, driving the native Britons to the fringes of the land and into continental Europe. The narrative included accounts of slaughter and servitude on a mass scale. But modern scholarship increasingly supports a model of Anglo-Saxon and British coexistence, influenced by laws like those of Ine that suggest a complex social structure, with Britons often occupying a lower status than the Anglo-Saxons. Debate continues over the scale of the Anglo-Saxon migration, whether it was dominated by a warrior elite who assumed control, or involved mass movements of people overwhelming the indigenous populations. Some theories propose a combination of both scenarios, with significant demographic shifts in settled areas alongside elite dominance in others. Gildas mentions resistance led by Ambrosius Aurelianus, which culminated in the Britons' victory at Mount Badon around the year 500, which may have halted Anglo-Saxon expansion, albeit temporarily. And despite a period of peace that followed this victory, the Anglo-Saxons established control over significant territories, including Sussex and Kent, while the West Saxons, under Cerdic, founded a kingdom in Hampshire around the year 520. A resurgence of Anglo-Saxon expansion occurred with Ceolwyn of Wessex's campaign in 577, capturing strategic locations like Cirencester, Gloucester, and Bath. However, internal conflicts soon led to Ceolwyn's retreat and eventual death, with Cirencester falling under Mercian overlordship rather than the control of Wessex. By the year 600, Britain had transformed significantly, very unrecognizable from its earlier Roman era, evolving into a kind of kaleidoscope of Anglo-Saxon kingdoms and sub-kingdoms. The period saw the emergence of what medieval historian Henry of Huntingdon termed the Heptarchy, referring to the 7 principal Anglo-Saxon kingdoms that dominated the land. We'll get to them in a moment. The concept of the Heptarchy serves as a framework for understanding the power dynamic and politics of early medieval England, which spanned from the 5th century until 829, when Egbert of Wessex achieved lordship over these realms. Sorry about the spoilers. Now, this term, Heptarchy, derived from the Greek words for 7 and rule. It doesn't imply a permanent or stable confederation of exactly 7 kingdoms. Instead, it's a convenient label used by historians to describe the fluid and often contentious relationships among the myriad of Anglo-Saxon policies during this era, commonly referred to as the early Middle Ages. Or perhaps you've heard the controversial term, the Dark Ages, which I don't really like. Its connotations bring up some imaginations that aren't really conducive to reality. Anyway, throughout this period, a number of distinct kingdoms and their territorial borders frequently changed due to the constant warfare and raiding, alliances, and dynastic disputes. The Anglo-Saxon Heptarchy is traditionally defined as consisting of 4 major kingdoms. The first being East Anglia, situated in what is now eastern England. This kingdom was among the later Anglo-Saxon settlements, characterized by its rich agricultural land and strategic trade routes. Mercia, occupying the central region of England, emerged as a powerful kingdom, especially during the 8th century when it achieved dominance over much of southern England. The third is Northumbria. This kingdom, which included the sub-kingdoms of Bernicia and Deira, controlled vast territories of what is now northern England and parts of southern Scotland. It was a centre for art, learning, and religious activity, particularly after the introduction of Christianity. And then the fourth major kingdom, Wessex, located in the southwest, eventually became the most powerful of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, leading to the unification of England under its rulers in the 9th and 10th centuries. Of course, in addition to these 4, there were the 3 minor kingdoms, which also played significant roles in the shifting alliances and conflicts of the period. They were just a little less relevant than the major 4. The first of the minor kingdoms being Essex. Situated to the northeast of London, Essex was strategically important, but often found itself somewhat overshadowed by its more powerful neighbours. The second was Kent, known for its adoption of Christianity in the very early days due to Roman influence, Kent maintained its own distinct identity and significant cultural influence despite its smaller size. And the third of the minor kingdoms was Sussex. Occupying the southern coast, it was among the first regions to experience Anglo-Saxon settlement and played a key role in the early history of England. Now, we've established these kingdoms, so we know who the main players are. So, let's go now towards the end of the 6th century. Ethelred of Kent emerged as the most dominant ruler in England, with his authority extending northwards toward the Humber River. This period marked Kent and East Anglia as the preeminent English kingdoms, largely due to King Ethelbert's powerful rule. His death in 616, however, saw a shift in power to Raedwald of East Anglia, who then became the most influential leader south of the Humber. Raedwald's ascendancy played a crucial role in the power dynamics of early 7th century England. He notably supported Edwin of Deira in his bid to unify Northumbrian territories of Deidre and Bernicia against the backdrop of Aethelfrith of Northumbria's demise. Raedwald left a power vacuum that Edwin exploited, seeking to expand Northumbrian dominance. This ambition set the stage for a pivotal conflict including Edwin, Penda of Mercia, and the Welsh king Cadwallon ap Cadfan of Gwynedd. This alliance between Mercia and Gwynedd proved to be formidable, culminating in Edwin's defeat and the death at the Battle of Hatfield Chase in 633. This victory, however, was short-lived, as Oswald of Northumbria, Aethelfrith's son, defeated Cadwallon at Heavenfield, near Hexham, restoring power to the Northumbrians. However, the ongoing conflict between Northumbria and Mercia persisted, with Penda defeating and killing Oswald at the Battle of Maserfield in 642. Penda's aggressive campaigns against Northumbria were ultimately halted by Oswio, Oswald's brother, who managed to kill Penda and shift the focus of Mercian military efforts towards the kingdom of Powys throughout the 7th and 8th centuries. The era of Mercian prominence was symbolized by Offa of Mercia's construction of Offa's Dyke, a significant fortification delineating the border between Wales and England. The exact purpose of Offa's Dyke, whether as a boundary marker or a defensive barrier, still remains a topic of debate. And now, the spread of Christianity. Of course, that is definitely one of the big turning points in British history. The spread of Christianity in the British Isles during this period can be traced all the way back to the Roman occupation. Early Christian writers like Tertullian acknowledged the presence of Christianity in Britain by as early as the 3rd century. The religion gained further official acceptance within the Roman Empire through the Edict of Milan in 313 under Emperor Constantine, and ultimately became the empire's official religion under Emperor Theodosius the Great by the end of the 4th century. The extent of Christianity among Britons at the time of the Anglo-Saxon arrival is, of course, very hard to know and a little ambiguous. Early efforts to evangelize the Irish, for example, initiated by Pope Celestine I in 431, culminated in St. Patrick's mass conversion of the Irish. This Christianized Ireland, of course, played its own pivotal role in spreading Christianity throughout the British Isles. St. Columba's establishment of a religious community in Iona, and St. Aidan's mission to Northumbria from Iona to Lindisfarne marked the spread of Celtic Christianity in these regions. And the Christians at Lindisfarne are also famous for other reasons. Notably, there was a big Viking raid there. I'll get to it soon, just perhaps in a video on the Vikings later on. Now Bede, in his ecclesiastical history, criticizes the native British clergy for their alleged moral failings and their general reluctance to evangelize the Anglo-Saxons. It seems they were a little bit lazy in their proselytizing. Well, despite Bede's criticisms, there is a consensus that the British clergy significantly contributed to the Anglo-Saxons' conversion. Augustine's mission to England in 597, sanctioned by Pope Gregory I and supported by Ethelred of Kent, laid more of the foundation for Christianity in the southeast of England. And by 601, Ethelbert's baptism marked the beginning of a more broader mission to convert the English, supplementing the Irish Church's efforts in the north and the east. Kind of like this Christian pincer maneuver. Something like that. Well, however, regions like Sussex and the Isle of Wight held out for quite a long time, and they remained largely pagan until St. Wilfrid's efforts in the late 7th century. This process of conversion itself is scrutinized for kind of its superficiality. It's often declared complete upon a king's baptism, rather than a genuine widespread adoption of Christian practices. So just because the King of Wessex or Sussex or Essex or any of the others converts, it doesn't mean that everybody is under the same umbrella, unless this king definitely chooses to enforce it, which, well, we all know where that leads. Now, interestingly, early churches not only displayed Christian symbols, but also pagan symbols, indicating a gentle outreach effort towards the pagan Anglo-Saxons, rather than the other methods. Well, discrepancies between Roman and Irish Christian rites, particularly regarding the celebration of Easter and monastic tonsures, led to a little bit of friction within the church. The Whitby Synod of 664, where St. Wilfrid argued for the Roman rites against Bishop Colman's Irish practices, resulted in the adoption of the Roman rites in England. This decision did not fully reconcile the practices between the English and Irish churches until much later, namely the 12th century, when the Roman rites were enforced more harshly in Ireland by Henry II. Now, during the 8th to the 11th centuries, Scandinavian raiders, predominantly Danes and Norwegians, embarked on voyages of plunder across Western Europe, including significant activities, of course, in the British Isles. These Norse explorers and warriors, widely known as Vikings, which means sea kings, by the way, initiated their incursions with raids targeting wealthy and ecclesiastical sites, exploiting the monasteries' riches. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle vividly recounts the devastating sack of Lindisfarne, a revered holy site, in 793, marking one of the first major Viking attacks on the British Isles. Told you. Now, following an interlude of relative calm, Viking raids had resumed with increased frequency around 835, which leads us to the mid-860s, which witnessed a bit of a shift from sporadic raiding to systematic invasion by the Danes. In 865, the arrival of the formidable Great Heathen Army, later bolstered in 871 by the Great Summer Army, bit of a less cool name, but okay, signaled the beginning of a decade-long campaign that saw the swift fall of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. Northumbria succumbed in 867, and in 869, East Anglia, followed by much of Mercia in 877. Kept dropping like flies, it seems. These invasions devastated the Anglo-Saxon landscape, sparing only the kingdom of Wessex from conquest. King Alfred of Wessex, in a remarkable display of resilience, retreated to the marshes of Somerset in 878, where he established a fortified position at Athelney. From this stronghold, Alfred orchestrated guerrilla attacks against the Viking occupiers, culminating in an assembly of a force from Somerset, Wiltshire, and Hampshire. This makeshift army confronted and decisively defeated the Vikings at the Battle of Edington in May 878. The Vikings' defeat led to their leader, Guthrum, agreeing to baptism and a withdrawal from Wessex, formalizing a subsequent ceremony at Wedmore. A peace treaty negotiated between Alfred and Guthrum established the Danelaw, a region that was under Danish control, while delineating the territories of Wessex, which included parts of the Midlands and all southern regions except for Cornwall, which remained under Briton control. Following the strategic victory at Edington and the peace agreement that ensued, King Alfred of Wessex embarked on a comprehensive campaign to fortify his kingdom against future invasions. Recognizing the need for a robust defensive infrastructure, Alfred initiated the construction of a network of fortified towns, or burhs as he called them, strategically leveraging the remnants of ancient Roman settlements for this purpose. These fortifications were not only military bastions, but also evolved into bustling commercial centers, drawing merchants and craftspeople to the safety and stability they offered. To support the maintenance of these fortifications and a standing military force, Alfred introduced the burgle hiddage, an innovative taxation system, which I'm sure, like all new taxation systems, was wildly popular. This fiscal strategy ensured a steady flow of resources necessary for the upkeep of the burhs and the sustenance of the army. The establishment of these fortified towns certainly did prove to be a turning point, significantly hindering Viking mobility within Wessex. A notable instance of the burh's effectiveness was recorded in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, which details a failed Viking attempt to breach the defences at Chichester, highlighting the strategic value of these fortifications in repelling raiders. The resurgence of Danish invasions in 891 posed a renewed threat to Alfred's realm, igniting a conflict that spanned for more than 3 long years. However, Alfred's comprehensive defensive measures, anchored by a network of burhs and bolstered by a restructured military, effectively countered this wave of assaults. The endurance of Alfred's system ultimately led to the exhaustion of Danish forces, who, by mid-896, had dispersed, marking a significant triumph for Wessex and cementing Alfred's legacy as a formidable strategist. Apart from his military and administrative achievements, Alfred was also known for his contributions to literacy and scholarship. He championed the use of Old English, a departure from the Latin-dominated literature of the era, most notably through the commissioning of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. This endeavour not only preserved the historical narrative of the Anglo-Saxons, but it also fostered a sense of unity and identity among his subjects. Between 874 and 879, the western half of Mercia came under the rule of Ceolwulf II, marking a period of political reshuffling in the Anglo-Saxon territories. This leadership then transitioned to Ethelred, who became known as the Lord of the Mercians. This intertwining of Mercian and Wessex royal lines solidified through Ethelred's marriage to Aethelflaed, daughter of Alfred the Great of Wessex, around 886. Alfred's establishment as the king of the Anglo-Saxons, circa 886, indicated a significant consolidation of power and yet another shift in the politics of the region. But he wasn't around forever. Following Alfred's death in 899, his legacy was carried forward by his son, Edward the Elder, who assumed the throne and continued the expansion and fortification efforts initiated by his father. The death of Ethelred in 911 saw Aethelflaed ascend as the Lady of the Mercians, a title reflecting her leadership and the esteem in which she was held. Together with her brother Edward, Aethelflaed played a pivotal role in reclaiming East Anglia and eastern Mercia from Viking control, demonstrating the resilience and strategic prowess of these new Anglo-Saxon rulers. Edward the Elder's expansion of the fortified burhs was crucial in enabling these offensive strategies against the Vikings. By the time of Edward's death in 924, he had extended his rule to encompass all of England south of the Humber River, which set the stage for his son, Aethelstan, to unify Northumbria with the rest of England in 927. Aethelstan's subsequent victory at the Battle of Brunanburh in 937 against a coalition of Scots, Danes, Vikings, and Strathclyde Britons was a defining moment in the establishment of a unified English kingdom. Legend made at Brunanburh. Despite the centralization of power under Wessex monarchy, tensions remained, particularly in Northumbria, where resistance to Wessex rule persisted. The reign of Edgar, Alfred's great-grandson, saw attempts to further consolidate this power, culminating in his recognition by other British kings in 973. The lasting impact of the Danish and Norse presence in the Danelaw region significantly influenced the cultural and linguistic landscape of England, and introduced a wealth of Scandinavian elements into the English lexicon and place names. This Anglo-Scandinavian fusion is reflected in the modern English language, which contains thousands of words of Scandinavian origin, and in the place names that dot the English countryside. Ever wondered why a lot of the English countrysides have very funny towns? Well, the names are somewhat emblematic of these linguistic changes. Edgar's death in 975 at a relatively young age led to a contested succession between his sons, with the elder, Edward, ultimately taking the throne at around 12 years old. Edward's short reign was tumultuous, and ended with his assassination some years later in 978, paving the way for Ethelred, known as the title the Unready, to ascend to the throne. Somewhat of a foreshadowing, isn't it? That was like me when I got my driver's license. Despite a lengthy reign of 38 years, Ethelred's tenure was marked by ineffectiveness and calamity, earning him a reputation as one of England's most unsuccessful monarchs, a sentiment echoed by the historian of the time, William of Malmesbury. During Ethelred's early reign, internal strife within the Danish kingdom saw Sweyn Forkbeard overthrow his father, Harald Gormson, partly due to the resistance against Harald's push for Christianity. This domestic conflict likely spurred the initial Viking raids on the English coastline. The situation escalated in 991 with the devastating sack of Ipswich and the Battle of Maldon, where the English, refusing to pay ransom to the Danes, suffered a crushing defeat. This emboldened the Vikings, who, perceiving weak resistance, decided to intensify their raids across England. Ethelred's response, characterized by evasion rather than confrontation, underscores the period's desperation and the ineffectiveness of the once stalwart Alfredian defense system. By the late 10th century, the Wessex monarchy had solidified its control over England's monetary system, boasting around 300 moneyers and 60 mints nationwide. This sophisticated currency system allowed for a periodic recoinage every 5 or 6 years, ensuring the king could mobilize significant financial resources whenever it was necessary. Following the defeat at that Battle of Maldon in 991, King Ethelred chose to pay the Danes off through a system known as Danegeld, rather than engage them in battle. However, this approach only encouraged further Viking incursions, rather than deterring them. Apparently, word spread that it was very easy to take King Ethelred's money. Tensions between England and Normandy escalated as the Danes utilized Norman ports for their raids. In a strategic move, Ethelred sought an alliance with Normandy through marriage to Emma, the daughter of Duke Richard I in 1002. This union aimed to sever the Viking-Norman collaboration. Yet in November 1002, Ethelred ordered massacres of Danes in England, which further complicated the Anglo-Saxon and Viking relations. the Vikings certainly did not appreciate the massacre. So, the Viking leader, Sven Forkbeard of Denmark, initiated a full-scale invasion of England in 1013, quickly gaining support in the Danelaw and compelling Ethelred to seek refuge in Normandy. Sven's sudden death in February 1014 allowed Ethelred to reclaim his throne, but the peace was short-lived. In 1015, Sven's son, Cnut, launched another invasion. Despite initial resistance from Ethelred and his son Edmund Ironside, Cnut emerged victorious, leading to a division of the kingdom that lasted until Edmund's somewhat mysterious death in 1017. Well, when the sources say mysterious, you can sort of use your imagination. Cnut then consolidated his rule over all of England, reorganizing the kingdom into earldoms and integrating the Danish and English nobility. His marriage to Ethelred's widow, Emma of Normandy, was a strategic one, aiming to unite the English and Danish claims and secure succession for their children. Cnut's reign was extended beyond England, as he also claimed the thrones of Denmark and Norway, establishing a North Sea Empire. Cnut's marriage to Emma of Normandy also led to a complex succession crisis upon his death in 1035, as his realm was contested between his sons by different mothers. Harald Harefoot, his son with Ealgifu, and Harthacnut, his son with Emma. Emma fathered her son Harthacnut over Harald and her sons from her previous marriage to Ethelred, Edward, and Alfred. Edward's attempts to reclaim the throne resulted in failure, and Alfred's subsequent murder in 1036, forcing Emma to flee to Bruges. Harald Harfoot's accession to the English throne was marked by his mother Ealgifu's influence, but his reign was short-lived and ended with his death in 1040. Harthacnut then succeeded, becoming notorious for his heavy taxation and unpopularity, which seemed to go hand in hand, which of course paved the way for Edward's return from Normandy and eventual accession to the throne as Edward the Confessor upon Harthacnut's sudden and once again suspicious death in 1042. The reign of Edward saw the influential role of the Godwin family, particularly after his marriage to Godwin's daughter. However, the relationship between Edward and the Godwins was fraught, exacerbated by the controversy surrounding the murder of Edward's brother Alfred, in which Earl Godwin was somewhat implicated. A significant conflict between Edward and the Godwins occurred when Godwin refused to punish the men of Dover for resisting Eustace of Boulogne, Edward's brother-in-law, leading to Godwin's temporary exile. And despite Norman claims of Edward promising the throne to William of Normandy, such a promise was probably never made. It's improbable due to the Anglo-Saxon tradition of electing kings, a process Edward himself had undergone. Well, either way, the Godwins, leveraging their military strength, managed to return from exile and reassert their dominance in English politics. With Godwin's reconciliation, and Edward marking their family's ascent to unparalleled power within the kingdom. Upon Godwin's death in 1053, His son, Harold, inherited the earldom of Wessex, and his brothers received other significant earldoms, though Tostig's harsh rule in Northumbria led to his exile, sowing discord between him and Harold. Edward the Confessor's health deteriorated significantly by late December of 1065, leading him into a coma. Briefly regaining consciousness, he entrusted the kingdom and the Queen's protection to Harold Godwinson, before passing away on January the 5th, 1066. Edward's funeral and Harold's coronation occurred in very quick succession, marking Harold's ascent to the throne amidst competing claims. William, the Duke of Normandy, alleged that Edward had promised him the crown instead, further claiming that Harold swore loyalty to him during his stay in Normandy. Additionally, Harold Hardrada of Norway claimed the English throne through connections to Cnut's lineage, and an agreement between Magnus of Norway and Harthacnut of Denmark. Tostig Godwinson, Harold's brother and estranged from him, initially sought William's support in Normandy, but ended up allying with Harold Hardrada after being forced by storms to Norway. Tostig's journey saw him raiding the English coast, before eventually joining forces with Hardrada, amassing a substantial Viking fleet. In September 1066, the Viking army, with Tostig as Hardrada's vassal, sailed into the Humber estuary and marched towards York. At Fulford Gate, they clashed with the English forces, led by Earls Edwin and Morcar in a brutal battle, resulting in a Norse victory and their subsequent entry into York. Harold Godwinson, upon hearing of this invasion, rapidly marched north with an English army, confronting Hardrada at Stamford Bridge. The ensuing battle, which spanned 2 days, ended in a decisive victory for Harold, which allowed the Norse survivors to retreat in a mere 20 ships, significantly diminishing the Norse presence and momentarily securing Harold's rule before facing the impending Norman invasion led by William. After securing victory at Stamford Bridge, Harold Godwinson's time for celebration was abruptly ended by the news of William of Normandy's landing in England. With William's forces disembarking on September 27th, 1066, Harold hastened his army southward, culminating in the pivotal Battle of Hastings on October the 14th, where Harold fell, marking the demise of the Godwin dynasty. The battlefield claimed not just Harold, but also his brothers and key allies, effectively dismantling the Godwin power base. William's march to London subsequently met minimal resistance, leading to his coronation at Westminster Abbey on Christmas Day. Merry Christmas. The subsequent decade under William's rule was defined by his firm efforts to cement his control, characterized by, of course, the brutal suppression of anyone who looked at him sideways. The harrowing campaign known as the Harrying of the North, with its deliberate devastation and resulting mass famine, remains a stark illustration of his relentless pursuit of dominance. By the end of William's reign, the Anglo-Saxon elite had been largely displaced, and the transformation initiated by Norman architectural and cultural impositions signified a profound shift in the fabric of English society, and an even more profound end to the time of the Anglo-Saxons. And an end to the video. Isn't it funny how those two things match up so well? I'd like to thank my Mega Chat tier patrons. There's 3 of them. That is JC, Stark Factory, and Jeffrey. 3 Chads. Thank you very much. If you'd like to support the channel, I don't have to explain to you what to do. Head on over to the Patreon, follow the links, and you can work it out. Otherwise, thank you very much for joining me. Did you have fun? I certainly did. I will see you in the next video, where we'll go back in time once again. Who knows to where or when? But either way, I'll be right there with you, from dawn to dusk. Good night, everybody.